It's not a dumb question at all. We've been seeing so many disasters, weather disasters of all kinds over the last few years that people do wonder often, how can all of these be caused by climate change or none of them caused by climate change? And there is some pretty complicated science that goes into determining if a given event actually is caused or made worse by climate change. So for individual events, individual disasters, say a major flooding event or a heat wave or a series of wildfires even, there are some pretty clever ways that scientists can use to try to figure out if this was made a whole lot worse by climate change. These are often they're called fingerprint attribution studies. Basically, you're looking for the fingerprint of climate change in the event. And what they do is they take both observations of what has happened in that particular area over time. So take a heat wave. Has a heat wave like that occurred in the same area before? Or has it not been as strong in the past? They'll then take that and they will compare it to computer models. So these are computer programs that they can sort of model what is happening in the atmosphere. And they can do that in a way that basically takes climate change out of the equation. So you could imagine what would happen if there was no climate change versus what happens when there is climate change. The results of these modeling studies can show that this particular heat wave would have almost never happened if there was no climate change. Last summer, the summer of 2021, there was a massive heat wave in the Pacific Northwest, around Seattle, Vancouver, Portland area, and it was a deadly event. It killed a lot of people, and it was just unprecedented temperatures. Scientists determined that this was what they called sort of a 1 in 1,000 year event, meaning that it was only likely to happen once every 1,000 years. It would basically have been impossible without climate change's influence. The 1 in 1,000 year event is going to come down to, maybe a 1 in 100 year or 1 in 50 year or even 1 in 10 years for certain kinds of things. I mean, that was a very extreme heat wave, but it's the kind of heat wave we will start to see more and more. Sometimes they determine that the fingerprints of climate change actually aren't that important. That baseline is still there, we have raised the temperature, and so that is important, but sometimes it turns out that natural variability in the climate system is more of the culprit. So for example, there's an ongoing drought in Madagascar, which has led to some pretty serious problems with food security in what is already a very poor country. The scientists who looked into this basically figured out that this drought, which is now a few years old, is much more related simply to the natural variability of the climate system. It actually doesn't have those fingerprints of climate change all over it. An important thing to remember right now is that basically every disaster you hear about does have the changing climate as a baseline, essentially. We've changed the entire atmosphere so much at this point that even if a given event doesn't end up being sort of made a whole lot worse, everything is being sort of juiced a little bit by climate change. Some scientists now think that because we have changed the system so much, it is now more of a challenge to prove that a given event is not exacerbated by climate change than one actually is exacerbated by climate change.